I didn't get a chance to talk about this yesterday through all the NFL scuffle, but Carlos Alcaraz beats Jannik Sinner at the U.S. Open. And even though it was a four-set match, it was pretty convincing. The sets that Carlos won, he won pretty straightforward. And what can I say about Carlos? He played a fantastic U.S. Open, one of the best runs you'll ever see to a Grand Slam title in your lifetimes and at least in a very long time. He only dropped one set, and that was to Jannik Sinner. It's pretty wild to see because he was actually dominating Jannik for most of the match, for really all of the match, especially the sets that he won. So it's funny that he even dropped the set. It almost felt like he wanted to throw Jannik a set specifically just to get the pressure off of being the first man to win a slam without dropping a set, since I believe Nadal did it last, whenever that was. But Carlos Alcaraz wins and he pulls through. And I'll be honest, I was skeptical. I thought that Jannik obviously won at Wimbledon and he's the best hardcore player in the world. He's defending U.S. Open champion and the two-time Australian Open champion. You probably don't favor Carlos over Jannik on this surface. Clay and grass, probably. That's why it was a little bit more of a surprise when Jannik should have beaten Carlos at Roland Garros and then did beat him at Wimbledon. But regardless, Carlos Alcaraz was masterful. He was phenomenal. That was one of the best serving performances that you will see throughout an entire Grand Slam. He only faced 10 break points the entire tournament. Only faced 10, and I believe he saved 7 or 8 that he faced. Served phenomenally, was barely on deuce, was barely behind at all in service games. He would usually break early, and it was over. So Carlos was exceptional, and there's just so much great to say about him. But the bigger story for me isn't about Carlos's victory. It's about Sinner and Alcaraz as a whole. Many people have been speculating what this rivalry will end up as in the future. And will it rival the Big Three rivalry? And I think it already has. Over the last 2 years, they've won all of the Grand Slams, all 8 of the Grand Slams over the last 2 years, and is already prepping to be the next great tennis rivalry. Bjorn Borg, John McEnroe, one of them. There won't be 3 guys, but probably just 2 guys. I don't think Holger Rune, I think, has shown me that he won't be in their conversation. He can beat them once or something like that, but he's not going to be the third guy. Daniil Medvedev, no. Alexander Zverev, no. Joao Fonseca, maybe. He's very raw. He's only 18, but he seems to have an abundance of talent, so who knows. But if it's just these 2 guys, what does it say about their future? Now, I've been listening to a lot of commentators, and one thing that I slightly agree with is this. For me, Jannik Sinner will probably end his career more in the tier of an Andre Agassi and a Pete Sampras. You're not a tier 1 all-time tennis player, you're probably a tier 2. It doesn't mean you're not a top 10 player of all time, but I think that's the tier he'll end up in. Largely what we calculate that by is slam count, the total number of slams that you won. We know that Pete Sampras held the record with 14. The Big Three, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, obliterated all 3 of those. Federer with 20, Nadal with 22, and Djokovic with 24. But it feels like to me that Alcaraz will probably end up in that Federer, Nadal, Djokovic territory. Jannik will probably end up maybe a little bit more in the Pete Sampras, Andre Agassi territory, or at least a little bit above that. My prediction is that Jannik wins anywhere from 15 to 19 slams in his career. Carlos wins anywhere from 20 plus in his career. 21, I'd say, plus in his career. Will he beat Djokovic's 24? Will he even beat Nadal's 22? Who knows? That has a lot to do with injuries and luck and overall consistency and just how well you age. Because let's not forget, Djokovic has won like half of his slams after the age of 30. So that's aging masterfully. And, Federer, even after winning his last slam in 2012 when he was 30, he didn't win one for 5 years and then won 3 in 2017 and 2018. That's very rare. How will Alcaraz's age? Because a lot of his game is heavily benefited by speed and agility and traits that are very great while you're young. How will he look as a player when he's 32, 33, 34? That's yet to be seen. And it feels like to me, Carlos Alcaraz is going to be in that tier. We're going to talk about him, I believe, as one of the 4 greatest tennis players ever. Where he'll fall from 1 to 4, that's to be seen. But I believe with his talent and what I've seen so far, he'll be one of the 4 greatest players ever. Sinner will probably be more like top 10. I don't think he'll be above the Big 3, or Alcaraz, but will he be above a Pete Sampras or an Andre Agassi? Bjorn Borg, John McEnroe, Rod Laver we have to throw in the mix, Ken Roswell we have to throw in the mix. Will he be above those guys? That is yet to be seen. But I don't think he'll be in the same category as Alcaraz when it's all said and done. Also, given that Carlos is younger and he just seems to be a little bit more dynamic on all the surfaces. Now, my worry for Carlos coming into this Open is this. He is such an amazing player, but he may be the most unbeatable and beatable player at the same time. How often do we see him play in 5-set matches at the beginning of a slam? How often do we see him allow his opponent to get back into the match? How often do we see him get frustrated with himself and then start playing worse? We see it all the time. We see it way too often. It happened in Roland Garros and it happened at Wimbledon. In his first match at Wimbledon was a 5-setter against a guy who was about to retire. And you're like, what is going on, Carlos? This isn't you. You're way better than this. And he just sometimes allows opponents to get back into the matches. This is why this slam, when it's all said and done in Carlos's career, may be the most important slam of his career, because I think he finally figured it out and unlocked the switch and got into a headspace mentally where he's able to play at the top level that Carlos Alcaraz is able to play for an entire slam. Not just for a game, not just for a set, not just for a match, an entire slam, because he can play phenomenally against Sinner. He has a great record against Sinner. He has beaten him, 10 times, I believe now, or against a Djokovic who he, beat in straight sets in the semifinal, or against any of the great players. He can beat them all. No question he can beat them all. And he usually finds his stride at the latter ends of a slam. But can he do it at the beginning? Can he do it in the first, second, third round? Because believe me, that is very important, because if you don't play at your level at one of those matches, somebody can shock you. Somebody can surprise you. Djokovic has lost a Grand Slam matches to Sam Querrey. He's lost Grand Slam matches in like the second, third round of the Australian Open once. He lost to Alexei Popyrin last year. Obviously, Carlos lost to Botic van de Zandschulp at the U.S. Open last year. If you don't focus and if you're not 100% there, you can get stunned by somebody, especially at this level of tennis. And that was my worry for Carlos. But for him to come out and to absolutely dominate this U.S. Open from start to finish and not allow any of the fans to get in his way, to not allow them or whatever they're saying to get in his line, that, oh, I'm inconsistent, or I'm this and that. He actually said it in one of his press conferences, people, I'm saying I'm inconsistent, but he's made it to the final each of the last, I think, 8 tournaments that he's played in with like 6 titles or 7 titles or something like that. He lost in the final of Barcelona and the final of Wimbledon. But other than that, I mean, the last time he didn't at least make a final was probably like March. I mean, he's just been cruising through the entire ATP. And that's why I think Carlos Alcaraz is hands down the best player in the world. He achieved number 1 player in the world status again. And even without the number 1 ranking, I knew he was the best player in the world, because he can reach a level where if he plays at that level, even if the other guy is playing his best, nobody can beat him. Nobody can beat him. And Jannik Sinner will beat Carlos Alcaraz a few more times in their career. I think Alcaraz will probably get the better of the head-to-head and overall will have a better career. But Jannik will win more slams. Jannik will win more important matches. That's going to happen because it's tennis. It's impossible to say that somebody's going to win every single time. But I think Carlos Alcaraz has unlocked that one last step, that one last thing he needed, which is the mental focus throughout a match and especially throughout an entire tournament, particularly a slam tournament. And now, at only 22 years old, I think it'll be cruising for Carlos into many, many more slams down the future. And he's already got 6 and he's only 22. He'll end his career with 20 plus. I believe strongly he'll end his career at 20 plus. He's that great. He's that talented. And I just can't say enough impressive things about him, because he just takes my breath away every time I watch him. So, in the grand scheme of things, what did I think about the U.S. Open? The U.S. Open is always interesting because I can sense the fatigue that some of the players have, with it being the last slam of the year. The European swing is so tough. Roland Garros and Wimbledon, they used to be Roland Garros, 1 week break, and then Wimbledon. Like, it used to be like that. They don't do that anymore, thank God. I think Roland Garros 2 week break, then Wimbledon. Now it's Roland Garros 3 weeks, then Wimbledon, which allows players usually to play like a grass court warm up before they go to Wimbledon, which is great. But that's still a lot, because you have 3 clay 1000s before then. Roland Garros, usually grass court 500, and then Wimbledon. Players are done. Now with them extending Canada and extending Cincinnati, and now having mixed doubles at the beginning of the U.S. Open, along with the U.S. Open, which is now 15 days, along with the Roland Garros being 15 days, usually you can see that players are exhausted. And it seems to me that the U.S. Open is where you see the most upsets and where you see the most smaller players who maybe get knocked out earlier in tournaments or are playing a few more extra tournaments actually do really well in ways that you wouldn't have expected. But I was still largely somewhat disappointed with this U.S. Open. It was nowhere near as good as Roland Garros, and I thought it wasn't even as good as Wimbledon. And I don't think that's any fault of the U.S. Open. I don't think it's any fault of the stage. I don't think it's anything like that. It's just the unfortunate truth of where it lies in the calendar. So some of this tennis that I saw was a little bit underwhelming, as I would say. It was a little bit underwhelming. But that underwhelming did not include Carlos. It did include Jannik, which is a whole different discussion. He lost his set to Auger-Aliassime. He lost his set to Shapovalov. He wasn't playing against his best against some of those guys, but Carlos was just locked down for the entire tournament. I think I heard that he spoke with his coach where after Wimbledon, Carlos and Juan Carlos Ferrero spent 15 days analyzing tactical ways to beat Jannik Sinner. Because they know they can beat Jannik Sinner. Obviously, they've done it many times. And they're like, all right, we need to study and learn and realize, how do we beat this guy? And they figured out exact formula to beat this guy. And it says a lot about Jannik. Maybe his game is a little bit too one-dimensional. Maybe he's a little bit too predictable. Maybe he's a little bit too easy to dissect. And maybe he even said at the ending of his at the press conference, he said, maybe my game is a little bit too easy to unfold, easy to unravel. Maybe I just rely too much on power, heavy hitting, barely inching the line and getting a lot of accuracy. Maybe it's that. But when somebody brings in more variety and tries to beat me in different ways, Carlos Alcaraz, he would go with the drop shot at one point and then a power shot to the other way that he's looking at another point. So just switching it up and trying new things, and Jannik couldn't get with that. With Jannik, we kind of felt like we knew what we were getting. Carlos, we never know what we're getting. It's always something special, something extraordinary. And you got to give him major props for that. He's the best player in the world. And he showed again why he's the best player in the world. And he did it on a hard court, which I thought he wouldn't be able to do on the hard courts because he hasn't played well on a hard court, quite frankly, since he won the U.S. Open in 2022. He surprisingly lost. He pulled out of Australia in 2023. Surprisingly lost to Medvedev at the U.S. Open in 2023 when we were hoping for a Djokovic-Alcaraz final. Lost to Djokovic in the 2025 Australian Open. Lost in the quarters as well in 2024 Australian Open. Got destroyed by Botic van der Zandschulp at the U.S. Open last year and came back and won the whole damn thing and played impressive. So which just shows that it doesn't matter the surface. Carlos is the best player in the world. Sure, maybe some surfaces help him, like clay for sure, but he's the best on any surface. And when it all comes down to it, at the ending of this rivalry, whenever that is, and we should just enjoy it for now because we don't know what could happen, I think Carlos will have the edge. Now, for Jannik, believe it or not, Jannik can still capture the number one player in the world title. Probably not this year. I think Carlos gets the year at number one. But next year, let's not forget, Jannik missed 4 1,000 tournaments and at least 1 500 like Rotterdam. That's a lot of points that he can get because those will be points that he gets right away. He's not defending anything. He could potentially get 4,500 points if he plays Indian Wells, Miami, Monte Carlo, and Madrid. He made it to the final of Italy, so he could even do better there. He didn't play Rotterdam at all. He still does have to defend, though, both Shanghai and the ATP finals at the end of this year because he won both of those last year. So he will have to defend those. He did make it to the final of China. I think he plays China again. And I do think he will play the Paris Masters this year. So that'll be a 1,000 that he can get. And so he could still rack up a lot of points. And it is mathematically possible for him to finish at the year in number one. I think it'll be Carlos, but Jannik could easily be the number one again at like the middle of next year once we get into French next year because of all that time that he lost by being suspended. And overall, Jannik will probably never be as loved as Carlos is because of the whole doping situation. And a lot of it, I don't believe, is Jannik's fault. That's the problem. It's not his fault. A lot of it has to do with, if we remember Simona Halep, they suspended her for 4 years 4 years when they found something in her substance. They suspended her. It eventually got reduced down, but the initial ruling was 4 years. For Jannik, when we figured out about it, they didn't ban him immediately. They actually allowed him to go play at Cincinnati and then win Cincinnati and then win the US Open after it was like, oh, you failed 2 positive tests. And like I said, I still don't believe he was guilty, just because he's just as great now, just as great as he was before. So how did that have a factor in? But that's beside the point. But because of that, he will never get the love and praise that Carlos does, because people aren't necessarily mad at Jannik. They're mad at the ATP and the tennis structure for not punishing him the same way that they punish somebody else. I believe that Simona Halep was punished, lighter, where they only gave her 3 months or allowed her to play and then ruled on her later, did something like that and didn't make her miss a slam, because Jannik also, they strategically suspended him in a way where he wouldn't miss a slam. Maybe people wouldn't be as mad at Jannik. So I don't even think a lot of it is about him. And I don't know if not receiving as much love from other people maybe affects Jannik in a way, because it seems like Carlos always gets love wherever he goes, unless it's Italy, at the Italian Open, and he still won that against Jannik in the final. But it seems like Carlos receives that love and praise and glory from wherever he goes in all these major tournaments, and Jannik doesn't. Is he okay with being the villain? Will he take a Djokovic-like role and be okay with players not loving him? Or will that really sour him and start to affect him in negative ways and throw off his game? There's absolutely no way to know that, and I'm curious to see how that happens. But regardless, Carlos Alcaraz won the US Open. He is the number 1 player in the world right now, but we already knew he was the best player in the world. I cannot wait for the rest of the year of tennis. I think several guys are not going to play in the Laver Cup. I think the Laver Cup, with its scheduling right after the US Open, it's essentially made in a way where, guys who just play deep into the US Open, especially the final, are going to pull out. It's not that important of a tournament, if we're being honest. But respect to Rod Laver, and I respect Federer and them for making the tournament to honor his legacy, but I don't think that's going to go far. But Carlos, man, he's just the best 22-year-old player I think we've ever seen. Hands down. The best young player we've ever seen. The most complete young player we've ever seen. And it's scary to think that he's only going to get better. How? I don't know. But he will only get better. And as tennis fans, we're so privileged to be able to see that. But this rivalry will continue for long periods. And I'm so excited to see where it leads, because these two guys bring us absolute joy every time we watch them.